Hulkenberg kind of exemplifies one of the worst parts of Formula One. Because Formula One is not what we call a spec series, where every driver has the same car. The cars from the top of the grid down to the bottom are not created equally. And so we consistently get into this conversation of what's more important, the car or the driver? And unfortunately, the answer is usually both. But to some degree, when you look at a driver like Nico Hulkenberg, it kind of feels like the car is the more important part. Every 6 races of the season, I do a big head-to-head episode of Grid Chat where we talk about every driver and who's stacking up against their teammate. And the reason we compare drivers to their teammates so much in this sport is because that's the only other person on the grid who has equal machinery. And so when we look at Nico Hulkenberg, one of the stats that came out of this was insane. While he and his teammate Gabriel Bortoleto are actually even in qualifying, the amount of positions that Nico actually makes up on track is gobsmacking. We obviously just spent a ton of time talking about his performance at Silverstone and the fact that he just got his first podium of his entire career. And that was such a big drive when you look at the fact that he actually qualified P19 and ends up P3. But it's not the only time he's had this incredible change in his run. In Canada, for example, he makes up 5 positions on track. He qualifies for that race P13 and he finishes the race P8. In Australia, the very first race of the season is his next biggest position jump. He actually makes up 10 positions on track, qualifying P17 and finishing P7. In Spain, he actually makes up 11 positions, going from P16 to P5. And in Austria, he starts all the way in P20 and ends up making it to P8. Then, of course, we have Silverstone, which is this massive run for him. Nico Hulkenberg is a driver who is largely underrated, and we don't often talk about the back of the grid in this way. Most of the time when you're watching the broadcast or we're talking about the big stories out of a race, we're focused on the front, focused on who's winning, where this battle is between the 2 McLaren drivers, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, and who's going to take home the Drivers' Championship. And very infrequently are we talking about the fact that a driver is going all the way from the back of the grid up into the points. And it only becomes this big fanfare when something happens like Nico making it onto the podium. But I think this is why we saw so many drivers and team principals so happy for him after the race at Silverstone. We even saw Carlos Sainz say for him, Nico has always been a top driver. And I think that is one of the things that you have to get used to in Formula One, is that there are drivers on this grid that could be doing so much more in a different car. If you had Nico Hulkenberg in a top car, in a Ferrari, a Mercedes, a McLaren, what on earth would this man be doing on track? Nico is the biggest version of this season, looking at these massive moves that he's making. But the question to me really is, if you put all 20 drivers on the grid in the exact same car, who would actually be the best in the end? Next year, when we see Kick Sauber become Audi has made it clear that they want to be a top team. And that might be the first time that everything actually lines up for Nico. And so while there are always going to be these huge highs for certain drivers, there's always going to be what ifs for others. And so I'm curious for you, what is your biggest Formula One what if? What driver on the grid now or in the past, if they had had a different car, do you believe could have been a race winner or even a champion?